dialing a few numbers on your telephone. Here in the United States, we dial 911. In the UK, it's 999. And in Europe, it's 112. In some countries, there are separate numbers to call police, fire services, and medical assistance. I recently read that the first emergency number system to be deployed anywhere was in London. It was in June of 1937 that 999 was dialed for the first time, and a special red light flashed on the telephone operator's table. Thus began the system of emergency services. How often have you called an emergency number in your life? I had to call 911 several weeks ago back when I found that my mom had fallen in her home. She fractured her neck and hit her head. After a week in the trauma center, 2 weeks in rehab, and a month in a skilled nursing facility, she is now staying with me, completing her recovery for the next couple of weeks. If you have ever called an emergency number, I'm sure it brings to your mind some traumatic experience. In any case, I'm sure the emergency number is not the most frequently dialed number on your personal cell. What is the most dialed number on your phone? Is it your spouse, child, parent, friend, business partner? You might even dial the same person several times a day. How would you describe your prayer life? Is it like calling an emergency number? Or is it a constant relationship? In the gospel today, we have a reminder on making frequent calls to God. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he begins to tell a story about prayer. That story is about a woman who was knocking at the door of an agnostic judge. The woman in the parable today is seeking the help of the judge. The judge relented, not because it was the right thing to do. Rather, he gave her a just decision just to get rid of her. The parable is about the necessity to pray always. It's about prayer in our daily life. And if persistence pays off in dealing with an evil man, how much more will it pay off when praying to God? But this does raise a question. If God knows everything, why do we have to ask for what we need? He already knows our needs. And unlike the woman who had to be persistent to get what she needed from the corrupt judge, God only wants what's best for us. So why do we need to be persistent with him? It might seem like the widow's persistence changed the judge, but notice, he may have changed his mind about what was expedient in this particular instance, but he remained the same corrupt man as before. It was the woman who changed. Her persistence in the face of obstacles stretched her, strengthened her, and made her fearless. Indeed, her strength of character became so great that the judge began to fear that she might harm him. That is why Jesus insists that we should pray always without becoming weary. Persistent prayer changes us, not God. It stretches and strengthens us to confront evil and overcome obstacles. It fills us with power and light. To grow in holiness, we have to keep at it. And above and beyond whatever benefits others may receive from our prayer and good deeds, these acts of piety and service benefit us who pray. Indeed, they are the means by which we become saints. Jesus said to pray persistently, not because God is hard to convince, but rather because our sinful human character is hard to change, and for many only changes gradually. Maybe one of the reasons God doesn't answer our prayers right away is that he wants to stretch us, to cause us to be open to ourselves, to trust more fully in God's grace, and thus develop in us the spiritual fortitude, which is the fruit of persistence, and thus become disciples who will do his will faithfully and with self-sacrificing courage and love, regardless of the challenges and obstacles we face. In the first reading today, we have a story of a prolonged hours of prayer by a leader of a nation on behalf of his people. We find Moses with his hands lifted up on behalf of the people of Israel. The Amalekites attacked the people of Israel on their journey towards the Promised Land. Moses decided that Joshua should march out to engage Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses himself will lead the community to the mountaintop to be in union with God. This is not just a political warfare, but a spiritual one. It has to be supported by prayer, by the grace of God. On our earthly journey, we face many obstacles. On what type of strength do we rely on? Is prayer just dialing an emergency number? Is God a mere paramedic who turns up at your door to provide first aid? Is that what you desire most? Or do you want to build a relationship with God? And if it is a relationship, how does one sustain it? Who of us are able to hold up our hands in prayer throughout the day? St. Paul would urge us to pray always and for everything, giving thanks in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God the Father. So how do we manage to pray constantly? How do we keep our hands lifted up in prayer without getting tired? The remarkable detail in the story of Moses praying on a mountaintop is that he is supported by two people, Aaron and Hur. Interestingly, Aaron was a Levite, a priest. Perhaps we too need the help of a believing community to support us in our continued prayer life. When I think about the Liturgy of Hours, daily prayer, I feel overwhelmed by the fact that God is working so powerfully in the lives of so many people who, as individuals and as groups, hold up their hands in prayer. They create a sacred space in the city, and with this hotline to God, they sustain the world. Whatever the method you use to pray continually, we need to. My prayer for us today is that we make God the most frequently dialed number in our lives.